Grand Rising, my loves. This is the Peach, your girl, Empress Queen Goddess. I hope all is well with the loved ones today. Hope your pets are doing well and all of your family. As for me, all is well. This morning we're doing Spiritual Studies Session 31. This session focuses on Mesopotamia. Oh, let me say this. I have no rights. This is under the Fair Use Act, loves. The Fair Use Act of 1976. 107. This is for educational purposes. Okay? There's some issues here. Okay. Once again, this is Spiritual Studies 31. This session focuses on Mesopotamia and how this polytheism that shifted in the ancient world became the Bible. From Samaria to the Assyrians and Babylonians, onto the writers of the canonical Bible and all of its apocryphal rough drafts, we can tease out the history of we can tease out the history of thought, the line that went through goddess worship to God slaying Leviathan. Although the study of Samaria is overflooded with ancient alien interpretations, this talk focuses on the comparative religion perspective, keeping to the myths and the interchanges of ideas from culture to culture. So this is Spiritual Studies, Session 31 with my guy, C.G. Darling. I hope you all enjoy this. If so, leave me a big thumbs up down there, a comment, share, subscribe to your girl. Now, without further ado, let's get it.
Going to be a messy topic because we have the Babylonians, the Sumerians, the Akkadians, all sharing certain tropes, using different names. It's very likely that I will misspeak certain names at certain times. For instance, I might be using the Sumerian term for the god or the Akkadian term for the god at misappropriate times. This is the mess of trying to reconstruct Mesopotamia in study. So, although there's a lot of mix around here, we're going to spend time focusing on the mythos of Sumeria.
Good morning, love.
All
How
the
you
different
doing?
gods, trying to pave way to an understanding of the Enuma Elish, which is the 7 tablets of creation, the creation story of the Sumerians, which could, have been changed by the Babylonians. We're going to just really dive in. Now, it begins with scholars being convinced that the Bible was the oldest book there was, a very original piece of work. And so they went to go excavate in attempts to validify this. And actually, the opposite was true. What they were digging up was compromising what they intended. And that was, amongst many things, the Enuma Elish. So in this, we find many cases of the story of Christianity being borrowed, being substituted, or at the very least being inspired from things that existed before it. Something that we're also noting in this talk is the rise of patriarchy, and how we'll notice in the Sumerians, as they pass on to the Babylonians, how patriarchy becomes more and more firm. And as we've established in this course many times over now, what existed before all of this was goddess worship. Originally, Inanna was one of these highly worshipped goddesses, along with Numa. But by the time of Hammurabi, say around the 1700s BC, this is when we start to see that patriarchy, the ruling gods, start to reign in Babylon. So, with some of that context out of the way, we'll focus now on all these different deities of Sumeria shared by Babylonia. We're going to start with the highest and go down, so that by the time we get to the creation story, we'll be able to understand it, in quotes. So in Babylonian, it's Apsu, and in Sumeria, it's Abzu. And Abzu is the original thing of the universe, the cosmos, of creation. The Abzu is a type of water. This Abzu was used by the gods to extend their lives by being immersed in this water, that they, the gods, would have grown old and presumably died if they had not been submerged from time to time in this Abzu. Again, water, sacred water. However, when studying these pronunciations, it would make it more seem that Abzu is a state of being and not necessarily a place. It's a state of, say, trance meditation or something that causes rejuvenation. Might I step out on a leg and say that this is pure spirit in another type of allegory? Now, when one is inside of the Abzu, they have been quoted to say that they seem to levitate. And this act of growing younger seems to have some fountain of youth vibes here. So here I would say is one of the originating myths that leads to the eventual seeking of the fountain of youth. An old man becomes young again once he drinks of this water. And in Sumeria, in these old times, there is this washing of the hands ceremony, or this type of emergence ceremony to become younger or to imbibe whatever Abzu is. And this, we could say immediately, is the baptism, the originating mythos of the baptism. But we'll talk about that more later. Something we'll also talk about more later is in the creation of man, Enki, who we'll talk about, takes the clay to form man out of the Abzu. So whatever this state of being is very mystic, very mysterious. But again, this is the original existence. So it would seem to be life itself, or the life force, the vital, whatever it is, it's involved in an assortment of different ceremonies. And in the hymn to Enlil, it says, the Abzu which no one can understand, its interior is a distant sea, which heaven's edge cannot comprehend. And when we're using waters here, we have to preface something that I've said many times in the course, that this is the cosmic ocean. This is everything. The ancients believed the space was ocean. So when we're saying waters, ocean, we mean everything, the ether, the prima materia, the akasha, what have you. So it is also said in another text that Abzu is where fates are determined. So it would seem that whatever this state of being is contains all potentiality. So Abzu, in his first form, is represented as this ocean, as stated, as the cosmic ocean. And this trope will be taken by many different religions, but here we can note it as the ancient Egyptian concept of the Nun, or the N-U-N. And in the story of the Nun, again, pure, fresh water, void of any tainting, that looking into it would be without a glimmer of any kind, pure darkness. And in the beginning, Abzu is alone, and then comes what we'll call Tiamat, which also has the name Namu. But Tiamat represents salt water or saltiness. And when these two meet, Abzu and Tiamat, they coalesce or become lovers. And this is where creation comes from the mixing of these two. Note, we have a very subtle form of masculine and feminine here. Tiamat, also interestingly enough, is a personification of the Milky Way. This is why later on she will take the shape of a serpent in the shape of the Milky Way. And in this, we also see the Egyptian creation says that the Milky Way is a salty river of sperm that brings fertility to the heavens. And in Sumerian, there is only one word for water and sperm. They are the same word. So these two things go hand in hand, which is an interesting way to further dissect this. So brief mention more on Tiamat. As I mentioned, that's the Babylonian word, and the Sumerian word is Namu. And she is at first in Sumerian depicted as a positive motherly figure, which is only later by the Babylonians depicted as a serpent dragon. Namu in Sumerian is helping to take part in the creation of humankind. And Leo requested that from Namu to create mankind and to create humans in the image of gods. You can see already where this is going to lead. And mind you, I just want to say right now, so this Namu would have been the primordial goddess that would have been worshipped. And then later, once the rise of patriarchy comes, she is something to be slayed. She is something to overcome. She is something to bring war to. So there right away is a distinct note. And in this beginning, you have Mamu. And this is the mysterious third, which, if you read the text, seems to come out of nowhere. Acknowledged as a vizier to Abzu. The name is, if we take an Akkadian look at it and a Sumerian look, Amun translates to body, or the main part of one's body, or the life-giving force, and knowledge, which is the interesting note here, because Mamu would seem to represent something that I haven't got to mention so far in the course, and that's the logos, or the mental world, the mental capability. So a sort of craftsman, the sort of active part of this otherwise lethargic situation if they are both, if Apsu and Tiamat are types of waters, you can think of Mamu as a type of invigorator. And so we have this personification of the Logos in this myth, which is curious, something to dissect further. And from the two, so from Tiamat, from Apsu, come the first two children, which are Lamu and Lahamu. And they're depicted both with having curly hair, 6 curls on their head, which can variate sometimes, but the more agreed upon number is 6 on the head. And the masculine, Lamu, is associated with this other character who is a bull man. So, mind you, we could have some Age of Taurus vibes here. We could have some primordial god, bull god vibes here, which is a whole nother thing to depict. And Lamu is said, this is debatable, is said to translate as either the muddy one or the hairy one. This is curious. And again, both of those are debatable. This is all open for question. And then Lahamu, the feminine side, is seen as a serpent. So there it is again, which if you want to look more into serpent mythology, just go back on the course. But this number of curls on the head, 6. So in an attempt to try to dig this down more, we should look at numerology and what it has to say. And in 6, it represents this unconditional love archetype, to heal, to support, to nurture, compassion, empathy, to be a light, to be in service to others. It is the archetype of partnerships of any kind. So while you have the primordial mother and father of the first 2 that are born are supporting aspects, which kind of go to, Kabbalism a little bit. But these supporting aspects would further consecrate or further solidify the masculine and feminine. That's how I'm interpreting that. Lamu and Lahamu are the kind of beginning forms of masculinity and femininity in truth, because the upper 2 would be utterly without that type of true personification. So it is also worthy to note that they are represented by the silt of the seafloor. So there it is, structure, support, that which gives a foundation to the waters. So we can think of this very literally, or we can think of this allegorically, of course. And they also are representations of the zodiac, or constellations, parent stars. So you could think of this also as the showing up of light in certain ways in the universe, in the cosmos. And from them, or further down the line, we have another 2 pairs, or another pair, I should say, and that is Ashar and Kishar. And Ashar means the whole heaven, and Kishar means the whole earth. So Ashar would eventually become Asher, or would become appropriated in the name of the Assyrians, the patron deity of the Assyrian Empire, meaning Asher. And you could also understand Ashar as the sky pivot, as it's said, that which gives a point to the sky, where the rest of it blooms from, the center. And then Kishar, which is known as the earth pivot. And you can think of this as the original earth mother goddess in this mythology. And since she's the earth pivot, she would be the very center. So it's giving these things a means to become. Then we move on to who comes next, and that is Anu. And Anu will have all of the deities that I just mentioned, Ashar, Kithar, Lamu, Lahamu, they will not get mentioned anymore. They disappear as background noise in the rest of the myth. Anu is the utmost power, or the supreme God, the one who contains the entire universe, and is represented by the northern ecliptic pole centered in the constellation Draco. So there's some heavy esotericism for you. The one on high. The original name in Sumerian is An, which when it's taking on Semitic form, it's Anu. And this would become a loan word or appropriated into the Semitic god Ilu or El, which we'll see in the Canaanite polytheism, and then move into Abrahamic. So Anu, On to Anu to Ilu, El. Another curious note. El, a lot to say about that. And Anu was believed to be the source of all power. He is the one that bestowed the rule to kings or gods alike. And this is curious because now we're getting very astrological. Far be it from most people to know how astrological the ancient Mesopotamians were. And so they wouldn't build a temple unless the stars were right. Everything was by the stars. So Anu is the one that gives powers, the heavens, the cosmos. Anu is the one that gives powers, that provides the right time, provides the right means for these things to happen. And Anu has two different consorts depending on the tradition and depending on how you look at it. This would be Antu in Babylonian and or Ki in Sumerian. And Ki was an earth goddess. So you can think of this as the forming earth. So you had the pivot, and now you have the form of the earth coming, congealing. Personification of the heaven and earth, Ashar, Kishar, into the actualization of earth in Ki or in Antu. And her consort, right, by being a consort, Anu and Ki would birth the Anunnaki, which this is a very hot button topic. By the way, I should say right now, I am not going heavy in on the ancient aliens interpretation of all of this. I am not going there. I'm focusing purely on the mythology here. So that's where that comes from. Those who come from the sky, Anu to Naki. And then later we'll see that in an arrangement with Enlil, which we'll talk about later, he cleaved the heaven and earth in two, separating on and moving on into the heavens and Ki to the earth. And you can think of that as the dome around the earth, the container that separates earth from space. Now, in mentioning more detail on two, which is more of an Akkadian mythology, then she is the parents of the Anunnaki, not Ki. But they're the same and also not the same. And then, Babylonian festivals would be given to in the name of Antu, Akit as they were called. And that this Antu would be an inspiration for many other goddesses, but would also be replaced by Ishtar, Inanna, similar to the Egyptian Anat or the Greek Hera. So mother goddess, earth goddess, I should say, more like, because there's the primordial mother and then there's the earth goddess. The Akkadians believed that when it rained, this is Antu's breasts giving out the milk of life to help everything be nurtured and to grow, which that might seem, like a bit much to some people, but if you really think about it, we kind of get rid of all these taboos, right? So to move on, next feminine entity that comes down the line of this mythology is Ninhursag. And this is the lady of the sacred mountain, given many different names. But first, Nin, meaning lady, and Harsag, meaning mountain or sacred mountain. And the many names are Nima, meaning great queen, Nintu, meaning lady of birth, and Mama, or Mami, meaning mother. Oh, curious note there. She's symbolized with a omega sign, or what resembles an omega, you know, the letter. And this predates Greeks, by the way, showing a certain element of importance and tying her to the Egyptian goddess Hathor. This is, interestingly enough, interpreted as a stylized womb, that the omega sign is like a womb. And if you jump over to the Celtic, and they're epitomizing their sacredness of the cauldron is of the same effect. The omega or the cauldron, both representative of the sacred womb. And so in this way, she's the womb goddess. And she is the one that is actually depicted as equal to and in love with Enki. And Enki, as we'll see, is very important. So, of course, like all these other mother goddesses, she is at first very worshipped, and then later on, down the line, down to Babylonia, lesser and lesser positions as patriarchy thrives. So now we have to talk about the big boys in the room. Enki and Enlil. And right away, in these stories, just for remembrance sake, Enki comes across as the good guy. It's mixed up in some bad things, but the good guy. And Enlil comes across as the bad guy. So he gave birth to Enlil, lord of air and earth, but mostly air, associated with the sky, and is given the tablet of destinies, which is kind of like the ability to control destiny, which is an interesting artifact of the ancient past. And Antu's child was Enki. Enki was of the Lord of waters and earth. Another name for Enki is Ea. And there's another one that I'm forgetting at the moment. So the skies go to Enlil, and the earth and waters go to Enki. And here it's saying that one is born from Ki and one is born from Atu. They both have the father of Anu or An. So that's kind of, like I said, are these the same mother goddesses? Are they different names for the same mother goddesses, or are they different, contradicting accounts here? So they're either brothers or half-brothers. And like I mentioned before, Enlil is said to have cut the heaven from the earth. So separating space from the earth. So already in this process of me describing the gods, you see slowly how the earth has come to be. First are the waters, the primordial waters mixing with each other. Then you have the foundation. You have the thing that gives ground. Then you have the pivot of the sky and the pivot of the earth. And then you have growing around each, adding materiality to each. And now we're seeing finally a separation or a distinction between heaven and the earth. So interesting just to kind of spell that out a little bit more. So Enlil really would be the one to separate ancient worship from modern worship. So before, as we've noted, every god is very literally something. We have a god of the wind, we have a god of the moon, we have a god of the sun, something that is observable. And any myth was allegorical to what the sun the moon, whatever would do. So when the sun would dip below the horizon, there was a myth for that. There was a story for that. And now with Enlil, we're seeing the first time in history where gods become abstract. They become a certain element of unrelatable or unseeable. And so this is the beginning of where the mother goddess tradition starts to break down. In abstraction is where this starts to break down. And in Enlil, we see the corruption as well. The corruption being that, before in the mythos, the Anunnaki were a sort of council. They kind of cooperated and worked off each other. And then after, when Enlil enters the picture and starts to run things, that's when it becomes competitive and people fighting for favors and, feigning their subservience and so forth. So the one that wants to be the supreme god doesn't just rule like a king, but is power hungry. And just as a quick quote from the Genesis of the Grail kings, the gods have clasped their hands together, had cast lots and had divided. Anu went up to the heavens. So here Anu completely disappears. He has very little to do with the mythos. He's just hanging out up there. To Enlil, the earth was made subject to rule over. The seas enclosed as with a loop. So that's interesting. They're saying the seas enclosed as with a loop. So right here we're seeing the Sumerians, the Babylonians, whoever, seem to be saying that the earth is circular. Interesting. And they had given to Enki the seas, the prince of the earth. So, Enlil's in the upper position, but Enki's also here as a prince. And from the biblical perspective, or I should say from the creation of man perspective, Enki is the one who created the first humans, or what we might call Adam and Eve. And Enlil is the one who made Eden. So this is getting into territory where you really have to stitch things together. I'm bringing this up not as a solid fact. I'm saying this is something that you can put together. I'm also not saying this is hard-nosed truth, but you choose it as you see it, right? So in this understanding of the tradition, Enki was the serpent, and Enlil was the one running the show. So Enki wanted Adam and Eve, or the first humans, to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge, which would be giving them spiritual growth, or the capability of infinite spiritual growth. Whereas Enlil wanted them to be, quote, spiritual slaves. So in this way, Enki is the friend of man. We'll come back to this later in different detail. But, Zechariah Sitchin is the one that really started this whole thing, right? And or really popularized it, I should say. And his claim is that the biblical word for snake, Nahash, comes from the Sumerian, meaning to decipher or to find out. And this is Enki, the god of wisdom and the seas. So that would make sense that the snake is the wise one if you're looking at it from the Sumerian perspective, or the Mesopotamian, right? And the reason, again, restitching, speculation, right? But the reason that Adam and Eve were ashamed of being naked wasn't because of how we might have been looking at it. It was because Adam and Eve were not the first human beings. This was the first human beings of a royal descent, per se, or of a spiritual sophistication descent. And their shame of being naked is to not be honored, of which that they are. So to be clothed appropriately to who they are. Again, restitching, take it for what you will. But in the Sumerian king list, it says, after the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Erudug, which this place, Erudug or Erudu, is the site of Genesis in their minds. So it is a literal place that was before the deluge. So before the flood, this was one of 5 cities that were around before the flood. So in this way, in this understanding, in the Sumerian, what's being stitched back together, Eden was a place where certain descendants were born of royalty or of a certain type of specialness, of a spiritual gift. And that this place was before the deluge. And that Enki was the patron god of Eridu. And this is where he gained importance. Now, it's also worth a mention here that Enki is the one that runs Abzu at this point. So yes, it does say that Abzu is dead, but for whatever reason, again, if you think of Abzu as a place or a state of mind per se, a deep ocean, whatever it is, Enki runs it, and it's his. So being that he's the water god, he controls the waters as they are personified here on the planet, in the ocean and in the seas. And so outside of Enki's temples, there would be a fountain, the fountain of youth, or a pool of sorts, or a sort of receptacle for baptism. And to talk about the flood here, Enlil did not want man around anymore. There's many reasons for this, but, well, actually, main reason being because they made too much noise, which, mind you, that was the reason why Tiamat and Abzu wanted to get rid of the younger gods, but we'll get there later because they make too much noise. So that's another note. So Enki, on the other hand, was against the orders of the Anunnaki, against the orders of Enlil. And he went to, I'm not recalling the name of Noah in the Epic of Gilgamesh, but he went to him and gave him the boat and saved him, his family, and gave him seeds of things to grow. So again, re-emphasizing the point that Enlil has no interest in humankind, whereas Enki is the one that's saving them and is associated with the sacred waters. Getting those vibes. Maybe he could open up the sea with his hands. And in the Bible here, so now we're starting to actually get into it, there are these patriarchs that lived in the early times before the flood for excess of 900 years. And just like that, right? Enoch was one of them who only lived for 365 years, as it says, before he walked with God, in quotes. And this 8, including Enoch, 8 patriarchs that lived beyond human years, correlates with the Sumerian king list. It's either 8 or 10. So if you take one source of the Bible, it's 8. And if you take another source of the Sumerian king list, it's 8. But if you take one other source of the Bible, the Yahwist source, then it's 10. And then you have another account of the king's list that says 10. So these two are corroborating with each other. So at the very least, they're pulling from Sumerian, right? To know of what happened before this time. And now I got to mention the other big boy in the room, which this is Marduk. And Marduk is the patron god of Babylon. So this is the one that Hammurabi would hold up. And Marduk will essentially take over all power structures of all the former gods. So, god of water, vegetation, judgment, magic, fairness, A storm god, an agricultural deity, would take on the powers of both Enki and Enlil. And here, by Herodotus, by what Herodotus believes, his temple, the ziggurat in Babel, is the Tower of Babel, the biblical account of the Tower of Babel. And so he becomes this most important god. When patriarchy rises, you need the king. And so he not only takes over all of the goddess worship, but also takes over all the former gods. Sound like a familiar story, huh? We're going through the Canaanite mythology talk and seeing how Yahweh was taking over all the other gods. So he attained a level of worship that is comparable to monotheism. So it's something, there is a word for it, I'm not remembering right now, but something that does happen sometimes in ancient polytheism, where one god really just takes over the lot, and it's essentially just about them. But there's also a mix-up here, because you get this association with the name Bel, and Bel is a kind of triple god. So Bel is just meaning Lord. We would find this moving in language down to Baal or Baal in Canaanite, but here it's Bel, and this is a mix between Enlil, Marduk, and Dumazid. So this is another curious note I want to throw in there. And by the way, this Bel thing you can see survives in Jewish stories of Bel and the dragon, and you can also find references to it in Daniel, but this is apocryphal, so it's not part of the canon Bible. So the side note here is this other god I mentioned, Dumazid, or Dumazid, I don't know how to say it just right, is mentioned by his other name, Tammuz, in Ezekiel 8:14. The prophet sees women of Israel weeping for Tammuz during a drought. An offhand reference. And in the New Testament, you see that there are actually curious parallels between Tammuz and Jesus, because Tammuz is depicted as a shepherd king and is resurrected from the dead. However, as I've noted many times in this course, being resurrected from the dead is not unique by any means in religion. You know, going to the underworld and coming back. Not only does Tammuz do this, but if you want to dig into Mesopotamian too, Inanna does this as well. And this goes back to shamanistic times. But just in the same way, why I bring this up, Bel, Marduk, they take on all the titles of the others. They take all of it on. And it's in this approaching patriarchy that they are doing this. So now that I've laid out all the groundwork, we really now have a good understanding, or a reasonable, right? There's so much more to dig into here. We have a reasonable understanding of the mythos. Let's just go through and stitch together this creation story, the Enuma Elish. So before creation, the two primordial deities, Apsu and Tiamat, coexisted. The cosmic ocean, the pure cosmic ocean, and the salty cosmic ocean. And from this mixture, whatever this etheric mixture is, on whatever plane this is happening, they gave birth to Lamu and Lahamu, the sacred masculine, the sacred feminine, as I'm interpreting it. From this, next came Ashar and Kishar, the center, the pivots of the earth and the sky, of the heavens. And from this came Anu, the whole boundary of the cosmos. And in this belief, yes, it's not infinite in a certain way. There is a boundary of the cosmos. And Anu gave birth to Ea, or Enki, with whatever consort he had, right? and that all these gods that were being born were making a lot of noise. And this commotion disturbed Tiamat, and Absu wanted to do something about it because he couldn't stop it. So Mamu, the Logos, the sacred Logos, comes to the two oceans, comes to Absu, comes to the pure waters, and gives his advice. And he proposes to destroy them. But if you read it, it's not really to destroy them. It's kind of confused because in another way, it seems like disciplining them, not necessarily killing them. But regardless, Ea and the other gods overhear this news. They overhear that they might get, axed. And so they come up with a plan. And Ea creates the perfect, and when I say Ea, Enki creates the perfect incantation to put Absu to sleep. And in this state is where Ea kills Absu and chains up the Logos, chains up Mamu. And what do we say about this? This trope extends well out from here. This is Ymir and Odin in Norse mythology. I'm not going to get too distracted right now. And with the heart of Apsu, Ea or Enki and his lady create Marduk. And Marduk is, something brand new, something above the rest, right? Mind you, this is the Babylonian that we're inheriting here. And Tiamat is going wild, and they keep trying to find ways to calm her down, but she won't because they killed, Apsu. But again, Apsu exists. That's how this is very confusing. And so what she does is she births a number of monsters, and she recruits a number of the other gods on her side. And here we have the inspiration for the Titans in Greek mythology. And eventually, Marduk, as it's depicted, slays Tiamat. And this is the beginning of the Chaos Comp, or God versus Leviathan, or Thor versus Jomungir, or all these other myths of Baal and the fighting the serpent, or Apophis in Egyptian. This is where it begins. So this doesn't just inspire the Old Testament God versus Leviathan. It inspires many other religions beyond that. And so this is where we kind of leave it. There's a lot more to the story, but that's where we're going to leave it. So this is how it gets brought in, the Enuma Elish being brought into Genesis, right? For one, we note that battle with God and Leviathan, but you cut down a lot of the structure of this story, right? You make it a lot tighter of a story, and you make it all about just one all-powerful deity instead, who brings order from chaos. In the Enuma Elish, we saw that slowly happen, right? And the idea is, in slaying the primordial God, that's what brought order to chaos. That's the idea that's established. But then here, it's God instead bursting further in the story of the Enuma Elish, and in the Bible in Genesis, human.
Yeah, my loves. This has been Spiritual Studies Session 31. Go within so you never go without.